appreciate just being, it's an honor to be able to be asked to have a seat at the table for, future medical professionals, because that's one of the areas where I find with my clients that, there's definitely a lack of understanding of what they've been going through in the medical community and the professional community. The professional elite folks sometimes don't have access to this sort of information. So I appreciate that you guys are even interested, because there's a lot that's been going on in the last 9 months. It's brought attention to police misconduct nationally, but this has been a problem for a long time. Background wise, I'm born and raised in Vallejo. I was former police officer and eventually became a civil rights attorney after walking off the job from witnessing misconduct. And so I had a particular agenda when I went to law school that was targeted towards what I'm doing right now. I spent several years just being a lawyer and litigating cases and working in that environment. And I guess in the beginning of 2019, one of my clients was attacked on his own property, and it became it went viral and became sort of national news that this thing had happened. And I started sort of getting directly involved in what was going on as more of an advocate than an attorney, in a role that at that point we didn't really know what we were doing. Within a couple of weeks, in February of 2019, Willie McCoy was shot while partially asleep in his car. And I was hit with the idea of, from the families, well, what do we do? How do we get justice? And I was essentially taught that you sue people. And it just, began to just not sit well with me that is the thing that we're pursuing, as opposed to figuring out what the other routes were to get to whatever, justice is. And we knew that it wasn't money, and money doesn't fix the harms that are caused. And so we sort of, with the McCoy family, began working with them and saying, we're going to turn over every rock to figure out how we can fix this, because I didn't want to have a long successful career of getting money for grieving people so that they could grieve in a nicer home. The money didn't help, it wasn't fixing the problems. And to some degree, I felt that to continue litigating without trying to work on the core of the problem in a more meaningful way, that I was contributing to the problem, because I was just, part of a system that would have attorneys come in, sue people, settle cases, and not resolve the underlying issue. So the underlying issue continues forward. And so we started initially in 2019 going to city council meetings. And that's when I was really introduced to what was really going on in the city of Vallejo. Going in as myself, jeans on, tattoos, they don't know who I am, have no reference point for me. And I'm sitting in a group full of Black and brown people that's taking up about half of the council chamber, and seeing the way that the council people and the city manager and city attorneys were looking at us. Just, you could feel the othering. They didn't know why we were there. They wanted to know what we were there for. And, it had been a few years since impacted families had came in groups to speak at council. People started speaking out. The first time that we were there, one of the advocates that was up speaking began to shout, just the passion of what was being said. And without having engaged in any sort of threats or violence, we ended up being faced with a dozen Vallejo police officers in SWAT gear with old school billy clubs slapping them in their hands. I mean, we just sort of transitioned immediately into this 1950s Mississippi scene where you've got the, heavy set old cop slapping their hand, the baton on their hand. And I was put in a position that I'd had some bad interactions with the police, but I had never been in a situation like that as a middle-aged white person. And so I had to physically put my body in between the community of impacted people and the police. And it sort of immediately that day sort of changed my view of what my role was. From a litigator, I mean, that's still part of my job, but sort of took on the idea that the advocacy was a more important component of what I was doing. By the next time we went, we were ushered out. Thankfully, nobody was harmed that day. But as we were ushered out, one of the officers that had shot Willie McCoy a few weeks earlier greeted us at the door. I mean, it was shocking to everybody involved. It was like the city's attempt to sort of antagonize the impacted community by having the shooter standing there. We couldn't leave the door. We were being pushed out. We were being funneled right past him. And so I'm like holding on to grown men to prevent them from just lashing out in a natural way. And I immediately sort of jumped back into lawyer mode after that meeting and started sending official letters to the city council people like, we have First Amendment rights, we're going to sue you. And next time we showed up, the mayor came up to me and said, "Oh, good evening, Miss Nold. I went from this person that they had othered with this other group of people, and now all of a sudden I'm a lawyer." And I saw the ability to take my privilege as a white person, as a lawyer, and say, what can I physically do to support the families while understanding that the most important voice that needed to be forward and advanced for the community was their voices, because I had not experienced the trauma firsthand. I was just sort of standing in the gap for them at places. And so sort of fast forward, we had been doing rallies and marches with almost no attendance, maybe 15, 20 people, cops in riot gear, SWAT team. And we were being treated as if we had committed crimes by simply demanding investigation into things we believe were crimes. The city was referring to us as the wacko fringe. They were saying we were essentially a fringe group of lunatics that were making things up. They were calling us liars. I started getting death threats, getting attacked, online by one of the lieutenants from the police department. It got very intense for a while. Kind of fast forward, we continued to we met with senators, the state legislators. We were up in Sacramento. We were working through various different legislations. We tried to turn over every stone we could to try to figure out what we could actually do to change the systemic problems in Vallejo. We were contacting the Attorney General's office, the Department of Justice, everybody we thought might possibly listen, because we didn't want to be able to say that there was anybody we hadn't reached out to. We wanted to, when we began to sort of publicly attack these people for not caring, we wanted to say we had tried. And so we went through all these processes, and things seemed to be getting a bit better. It had been 15 months since Willie was killed. That was the first period of time where there was like a break in time, where there had been more than a year that went past. And we were celebrating the idea that 15 months had passed as a mark that they had not killed somebody. And then right after that, Sean Monterosa was killed. That sort of changed the dynamic of what was going on in Vallejo. The city officials who had been maligning us and ignoring us suddenly were concerned about police violence. They were saying George Floyd's name. I mean, it was very different for us. They were putting up memorials to George Floyd. Local folks were putting together rallies. And somehow in all of that was going on with George Floyd, the actual impacted families and deceased people from this city got washed out of that conversation. We were at rallies hearing people, shouting out Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, but nobody was shouting out Willie McCoy or Ronald Foster or Angel Ramos or any of the people that had been murdered on our, in our own city. And so this is sort of this disconnect from what we knew was going on and what sort of the general population of Vallejo knew. And it occurred to us during some of those rallies where, some of the families were actually silenced. The impacted families were silenced by people, I believe, that were well-meaning members of the community who had wanted to put together something for George Floyd. And so people started talking about their lost loved ones to police violence. And one of the organizers basically said, let's get back on track, that we had somehow sidetracked something for George Floyd by talking about the people that had been killed here. And it's hard to explain how incredibly disheartening that was to the people here who had been waiting for people to rally and protest and come together. And when they finally did come together, it wasn't for the people killed in Vallejo, it was for somebody thousands of miles away. And so, we realized that what was going on out here is probably really more, when George Floyd got killed, the response in Vallejo was really, it was seasonal to us. It was performative in a way, because none of those people are showing up anymore, you know? And so we realized that, you know, there's still a big disconnect between the people that live in Vallejo and what actually is happening in Vallejo Police Department. A lot of people don't realize that in the last couple of months, there's been a whistleblower lawsuit filed by a former captain of Vallejo Police Department. And he's basically reporting that after Willie McCoy was killed, they found out that the officers had been engaging in a ritual of bending the tips of their badges to commemorate killing people. And so, which for most people is really shocking. How could that be going on? And we don't know about it, but there'd been so much, you know, so much happening out here and in the world that it just sort of went past. And no investigations were sparked. And, you know, the Department of Justice was looking at the city to see if our policies were good, if we had good training and procedures, but nobody was investigating the history of what had actually been happening out here. And that kind of put us in a position where we have to figure out what sort of external oversight we can try to compel, because we realized that the city officials, their concern for what was going on was seasonal. When the sort of phenomenon of outrage for George Floyd was gone, what was left were people in Vallejo whose family members had been murdered that nobody was speaking about. And still to this day, I mean, in the last 6 months, the city paid out nearly $6 million to one family over a man in 2018 who was on his bicycle. The officer essentially chased him down, beat him in the head with a flashlight, tased him, and as he was trying to crawl away to survive, he was shot in the back and in the back of the head. And a lot of people don't know his name. You know, Ronell Foster was a member of our community, and he was, you know, something that was essentially a crime that happened to him, and people just didn't even know. You know, we had people that were mad at us, local people who were mad at us because we were talking about Ronell instead of George Floyd. And, you know, it just, the harm, some of the harms that have came from the police violence, it's gone sort of far beyond the impact of just the mom or the children. You know, the harm that's happened in Vallejo with some of these killings have been the silencing of impacted community. Yeah, and LaDonna just mentioned the officer that killed Ronell Foster and shot him in the back was one of the officers that shot Willie McCoy a year later. He had not been terminated after murdering Ronell, and that officer managed to bend his badge twice before he left. He had 2 bends on his badge for murdering 2 Black men. Now, we haven't been able to confirm through our litigation, but at this point, it's our understanding that the only times they bent their badges is when they had killed Black men. And so, like that, and these officers were just cleared by the district attorney. And you know, it sends a message to the Black and brown people in the community that, you know, we can murder you, we can shoot you when you're sleeping, and nothing is going to happen. All with the exception of one officers, they're all still here. They're all still patrolling the police department. And it's shocking and it's terrifying for members of the community to realize those people are still out here, that any Black or brown person or vulnerable white person or disabled person or mentally unwell person can come in contact with any one of these officers on any given day. And that terror, you know, it's created for a lot of communities in the vulnerable communities, this sort of sense of always being in like a PTSD mode. You're always if you see the police, there's this urgent, you know, terrible fear that they're going to murder you, because it continues to happen. I mean, a lot of people didn't realize within a month of Willie McCoy being shot, his niece was in Vallejo just driving through, gone to a family event, like went from the freeway to the place and was leaving. She drove past the police. They thought it was a car full of Black men. They pulled them over at gunpoint. These are teenage girls, 19-year-old girls. She was dragged out of her car, thrown on the ground, tased, arrested, had never been in trouble with the police before, had no history, wasn't doing anything wrong. And, you know, no, that officer, when they went and looked at what he had done, the chief said it wasn't misconduct and hid it back under the rug. And, you know, of course, they didn't even charge her with any crime, but, you know, she's been doubly traumatized by her uncle being murdered and then her own direct impact with them. I mean, it's just, we have gotten to the point where what's happening out here is not consistent with statistics. The statistics of officers shooting a person in their lifetime, most officers never shoot a human being in their entire careers. We have officers in Vallejo who've shot 4, 5, 6 people. We have a member of the command staff who was promoted to lieutenant last year, who'd been involved in numerous shootings. I mean, we have some huge systemic problems. And it's not just the shooting, it's not just the deaths, it's the daily disrespects, it's the racial profiling, it's the people in town that have criminal records who haven't done anything wrong, who now have hard times getting jobs. I have numerous clients who had committed no crime but were arrested for resisting arrest, and they had to fight criminal cases and still have these records that exist even though they've done nothing wrong, that permanently sort of impact their ability to work. Vallejo's got one of LaDonna's got great, obviously super connected to what's going on out here. LaDonna, Vallejo we're statistically one of the worst police departments in the country for officer involved shootings. Our statistics are hideous. I mean, just there's a chart. If you ever want to find more information, there's an organization called Open Vallejo that's comprised a lot of statistics, and they've got a chart of how many officers in Vallejo have shot and killed numerous people. And there's dozens of officers in Vallejo who've shot people, and a number of at least a dozen who have shot and killed multiple people. People became aware of what happened with Sean Monterosa because Sean was killed, but they don't realize that officer had shot 4 people before that. Every one of those cases, the people survived. He told the investigators in all of those incidents that he thought all of those people were armed, and not a single one of them had a gun. And we did not fire him. The city did not fire him. And it's like you have this pressing situation of liability in Vallejo that continues to impact the community. All the funds that go to pay off legal settlements are money that we can use in the city for other things. We have a ton of issues that are profoundly challenging in Vallejo. Even if you just drive down the street, you can see that we're in dire financial crisis because even in the nice neighborhoods in Vallejo where we've got potholes and, things that are obviously unimportant compared to the loss of human life, but the impact of the police department harms every facet of the community. It besides the morale and the mental health of the community, it's impacting the city's ability to function. I'm trying to stay in one path. There's so much information in my head about this. A number of my clients have been diagnosed with PTSD post-incident. Many of the family members that were killed by the police were witnesses to the shootings, either with, physically present. Some of them had, called to get assistance for their family members. And what is left behind when the loved one is gone is a tremendous amount of guilt and second guessing and regret. And, everyone in Willie McCoy's family is going, well, why didn't I call him that day and have him come over? Now, I mean, of course, we can't change things, but everybody goes back and looks at what they could have done to potentially prevent it. And that just lingers with families forever. In 2017, a man named Angel Ramos was killed while in a fist fight during a family fight. The police came out, shot him, and then later lied to the press and said that he was armed, and he wasn't. They publicly maligned the family. Almost all of his siblings were present and witnessed what happened to him. Even his nephew, who was eight years old at the time, the police utilized him to clear smaller children out of the house and made him step over Angel's dead body 2 times. And this is a kid in our public schools who has not been provided the mental health resources to respond to what he has experienced. And there's a lot of children that have been impacted by police violence in the community because of the loss of their parents to the police violence. But it's not just the loss of the family member, it's the lack of justice and the impacts that has on the community at large. And obviously the family themselves have been robbed of justice, but it's that message that is sent that, you know, that it's still in 2021, it's still okay to execute Black people without any consequence. And the impact that that has on the well-being of the community is, I don't know that any study could ever properly understand the harm that that causes to you know, historically and currently oppressed human beings, to know that the police have gotten away with murdering people. You know, you're not going to get, you know, if a stranger murdered your family member, there's the possibility of somebody getting arrested and convicted and going to prison and paying some kind of penalty. With the police, you don't have that. You're left with just this empty, people left with this empty feeling of there being no justice. And oftentimes knowing that the reason why they don't have justice is because they were Black or brown or poor or mentally ill. But that, like you said, it doesn't just stop with the family. It's everybody that knows the family. Every impacted family's life changes immediately in profound ways. They, you know, whatever trust they had in the system of justice, the idea that government officials were going to look out for them, it immediately turns a person's life upside down. Many of the family members have become really almost full-time advocates because they don't know what else to do. You know, they've been faced with this situation where they feel like they're the ones that are obligated to get out there and fight for their families. And honestly, when we do rallies and protests, we're heavily surrounded by impacted people. It's the people that have been traumatized that are actually forced to fight for their, you know, fight for their right to be alive. I mean, that I think has been the hardest part for the families in my observations, is sort of the lack of community support. That's why it was so disheartening when the George Floyd protests came and went and left again, because it was the idea that this was something that was seasonal, and that as a rule that nobody, the same situation applied before and after. They were killing people before George Floyd, and they are still killing people. There's been, you know, there's been numerous officer involved shootings in the last 2 weeks in Northern California. And so, you know, we're kind of tasked, as me as an advocate, sort of tasked for what's the next step? What can we do? I mean, we haven't given up, but we understand that there's some profound things that need to change in order to make some headway here. I mean, the police department in Vallejo is starting to look at reform efforts, but the reality is all of the bad apples are still there. Their lieutenants, their captains, their sergeants, the staff that are making the decisions about discipline are all dirty cops. I mean, literally all of them. They've all been officers that were involved in shootings and misconduct that were promoted. The city saw them as a financial liability, so instead of getting rid of them, they promote them up the chain, up to and including you know, lieutenants who are under investigation currently for destruction of evidence in the Monte Rosa case. One lieutenant who is in the process of being terminated, who was physically and verbally intimidating me. We've got some real rotten stuff going on. And so we're all just sort of tasked with trying to figure out how to advocate forward, while being mindful that the people that are out here with boots on the ground are the people who have already been harmed. So I'm thankful that Dr. Allen, you know, that the university is actually going to look at the impacted community so they can understand it from a clinical standpoint. I mean, we can see it. I can tell people what I observe, but you know, like, there haven't been studies, because up until fairly recently, honestly, nobody cared. And it's a sad reality, but you know, being a person that we've begged people to get involved, and we just oftentimes are really just only surrounded by the people that have suffered the harm, or the ones that are having to fight for their own lives. And so, I mean, next week on February 9th, we'll be up in Sacramento at the Capitol demanding that the state initiate external oversight of officer involved shootings. But it's going to be primarily the impacted families. There's a few allies, but a few accomplices, but you know, it's mainly impacted families that are coming in. You know, we have such little support locally that impacted families from other states are coming in. Tamir Rice's mom is coming in to support the McCoy family. And it's the 2-year anniversary of him being killed. We're trying to demand that they come in and actually investigate the city from the Attorney General's office. We're very hopeful that the change in administration will result in some, some new oversight that hasn't happened under the Trump administration. But it's sort of hard to tell. I mean, um, this has been going on in Vallejo for a long, long time, and in other police departments. But I do cases from Salinas up to Sacramento, and none of the places are like Vallejo. The badge bending, that is unprecedented. I have never heard of anything like that. That is just something that it's shocking that it's documented at this point, where obviously we're thankful that there was a whistleblower who came forward to say what had happened. He tried to do something about it, and they fired him. And so all of these things sort of create the situation where the community, the targets of the police department live in sort of a constant state of fear that any day the police, person's going to work. Like I said, my client was attacked on his porch in a home that he owned. I mean, like, what protections does the community have if you're not safe in the sanctity of your own home, on your own? My client is a Marine veteran. He's a young Black man, but he's a Marine veteran, a homeowner, and it didn't matter. He had obtained the American dream, as they sell it to you, that he served the military, and as a Marine in good standing. He purchased a home. He was educated, and it didn't stop the Vallejo police from seeing him as a Black man when he was standing on his porch, and they attacked him and caused him to have a concussion and exacerbated injuries that he had in the military, and caused him just intense emotional distress. He will not return to the home he owns in Vallejo. He does not feel safe, and so those kind of impacts on a person's psyche, where he's done everything he could to stay out of trouble. He's no criminal record. He'd worked 10 times harder than another person might to create the situation to have this life for himself. And then in a blink of an eye, a known racist officer stole that from him. And how do you fix that? And we don't know. I mean, how do you give a person back their sense of belonging in this country? How do you give a person back their sense of their freedom and their constitutional rights when they're stolen from you, and the person that stole them from you keeps their job and doesn't get in trouble? And so that's what we're kind of trying to focus in on is, how do we support the impacted community from a mental health perspective? Thankfully, one of the groups that's worked with the impacted communities locally is the Anti-Police Terror Project. They have offered, they have a person who volunteers, a psychotherapist that volunteers to work with impacted families, but that's just one person, and there's hundreds of impacted families in the Bay Area, and every year there's more. And so the resources that are actually available, the free resources, are very, very minimal. I mean, unfortunately, I spend a lot of my own time with clients counseling people through, suicidal ideations and depression and anxiety and PTSD, because there aren't resources. The city in Vallejo has not set up any resources for the impacted communities. They've never offered a condolence up until Sean Monterosa got killed. There was never any outreach to figure out. I mean, even if the city's employee takes a human life, that doesn't prevent the city from saying, can we offer you resources? I mean, in the situation with all of the impacted families, even the faith leaders, the resources that were provided when the families went in to watch videos was a faith leader that sat on the side of the table with the police, didn't offer them prayer or condolences. And so some of the things that we kind of think about as being the people that would kind of step in situations like that, local leadership. I think Dr. Allen talked about that, the faith community. We don't have that out here. We have sort of the leadership is people that are sort of trying to lead themselves to, personal opportunities is sort of what we've observed. And so, we're glad that there are people in the medical professions who are actually interested in figuring out how to address the mental health aspect of it, because seeing the decline in families from the time that I meet them going forward. I mean, this police violence tears families apart. half of what I do are counseling folks that are dealing with situations that arose because of the loss. And I have nobody that I can refer them to. I can't say, well, you can call that. We got suicide hotline. That's like the extent of what we have as a resource that's available for, for impacted families, with the exception of one overworked volunteer who has a full-time job and then adds another several hours a day of trying to work with the families. And so just glad that there finally are, our resources being directed towards this component of it. We're working on the reform efforts in a variety of ways, through the courts, trying to compel them to get outside monitors, through the legislative efforts, trying to get external monitoring of police departments. But one of the components that isn't being looked at as much as supporting the impacted community from a in a humanitarian way, in relationship to to grief counseling, things like that. Those just aren't available. Like I said, we do, as lawyers, unfortunately, are doing things like that we're not qualified to do. I mean, I do it. I'm getting better. I've gotten better at it over the years, but that wasn't by choice. It's because I'm going into mortuaries where looking at people that have been shot 40 times, and I'm picking them up off the floor and trying to without any experience, I'm trying to get people back up on their feet, and trying to convince folks that have lost, some people that have lost everything, to get back on their feet and keep moving. And so it's impossible to explain the impact that the violence has on the families and the broader community, but it's profound. And thankful that, like I said, the idea that somebody's studying that finally, so that we can get some resources allocated to that. Our community can't function if we have a 25% of the populace that is at risk of being murdered and is experiencing PTSD in relationship to the police department. I mean, how can we thrive as a community when there's this sort of segment of people that are left behind, from a mental health perspective, from the people that are already impacted socioeconomically, that are now, their life has gotten twice as hard because they're now dealing with the police violence, paired with the lack of justice, and then mental health issues. And then we're expecting them to go back to work full time immediately. I've had impacted family members, because there are no resources, that the day after a son got killed, had to go back to work the next day. You're going to lose your job. And, those are the kind of things that, like, we would love to be able to have something set up, ahead of time, so that if something like that happened, that we could, provide some funds for a week or two for a person to keep them afloat, so that they wouldn't lose their housing along with their child. And so, certainly we're open to all sorts of possibilities of how to accomplish some of those goals. But I think one of the first things is you have to have statistics to be able to get funds. You have to have research. You have to have people that are willing to work with the community, that impacted community directly. So I don't know how far off target I am, Ms. Kelly. I did want to talk a little bit about the idea. What very controversial right now is the defund the police movement. I'm not a proponent of the defund the police. I don't think it's a viable situation. I'm a reimagined policing person. And so I just know that there's going to be at least half or more of our community that will never get on board of the idea of not having police to call if somebody's kicking their door in. Just it's not viable in the situations that we live in our communities, and the disconnect. We have no village in the community to take care of one another. And so until we have that, the idea of removing the police is not something that most of us consider viable. What I do consider viable is immediately in every city in the country is taking away opportunities for police to engage in violence, instead of having police that are responding to welfare checks and mental health issues and homelessness and addiction issues, that we would take those funds that are being allocated for police officers and put them in place for mental health workers, put them in place for caseworkers, put them in place for addiction specialists and people that are actually trained to engage with the problems the community has, so that what's left is similar to what they do for policing in Barbados, where there's sort of there are sort of community service officers that deal with nonviolent crimes so that armed people aren't responding. And then they have like a SWAT style police that come out if there's somebody robbing a bank or kicking doors in. And so we're sort of looking at how to get that going in all of the cities where you slowly are transitioning from having police responding. I mean, you get in a car accident, you don't need a man with a gun to respond. It's unnecessary. When you have a family dispute, you don't need a man with a gun to respond. You don't need police responding to, to write people tickets and things, because, oftentimes those are used as opportunities for racial profiling and continuing to cause harm to impacted communities. And so we like people to look at the idea of reimagining or reforming policing in a way that still provides a safety net for obviously violent crimes, but takes most of those tasks out of the hands of police, which would just save a tremendous amount of money on staffing. You could hire 3 or 4 mental health professionals for the cost of 1 police officer annually. When you do that, when you have situations like Ronald Foster, who was riding a bike without a headlight on it, which it was an infraction. If you had a customer service sort of oriented, person that was stopping and saying, "Hey, sir, you've got a light out, I need to write you a ticket," there would have been no risk of him being shot and killed, because there would not have been a person with a gun that was responding. So that would have saved the city, hundreds and thousands of millions of dollars in legal fees and insurance deductibles. Every year that we kill somebody, the cost of killing a person in Vallejo goes up, because the city continues to not fix the problem. And the way the courts are set up is the longer you have the problem without fixing it, the more expensive it becomes, until finally the city gets to a point where it either goes bankrupt or it decides to fix it because because it can't pay its debts. But reallocating the funds to other services take away opportunities for the police to kill people, and then you keep that money in the city to provide other supportive services. So one of the things is trying to get people on board with the necessity of doing that, and not the idea that your grandmother's not going to be able to call the police if somebody's kicking her door in. She's going to want to have that available to her, but to say that if somebody runs into her car and it's a hit and run, that we don't need an armed person to come out and handle that we would change that, because one of the things that we're trying to get done right now may or may not happen. We're trying to get an outside monitor in Vallejo, federal monitor, like the city of Oakland has. It is the only thing that I have seen reduce police violence, police killings. I've done one case in Oakland in 9 years, a police shooting. And because they had a federal monitor, all of those officers were terminated. Very similar to what happened to Willie McCoy, a person that was passed out with a firearm in their vicinity, and the guy moved just like Willie, and they opened fire on him and killed him. But because there was an external monitor, all 5 of the officers and sergeant involved in that situation were fired permanently. And so, but until we can get something like that, we really do have to, as a community, start looking at how we can, one, resolve the issue with police violence, but also how can we support the harm that's already been caused? Because even if you fix the problem, you still have this ocean of people that have this harm that has been caused. How do we, how do we as a community engage in restorative justice, where there's an acknowledgement of the harm that's been caused, and making people whole, and figuring out how to restore the community, from a trauma perspective. And so that's kind of something, I'm not qualified to figure all of those things out, but they're all things that I'm sort of tasked with having the conversations about with people like you folks who have the medical background, or have the medical background to start thinking about that. And I just certainly want to encourage, young folks that are interested in, potentially, working with these communities, to get yourself out there, and start, sort of rubbing shoulders with the people that have been impacted. I mean, it's life-changing for most of us to see the harm that's been caused. And, once you see it up close, it's very hard to turn your back to it. So I encourage you to do that, because it might spark something in you where the direction of what you want to do changes, or at least consider doing that in your spare time, for what, like, for as a lawyer, be pro bono work. I don't know what you call it in the medical field, but where you have volunteer opportunities and things where you can help serve, the impacted communities. Because right now we just don't have that, and it doesn't have to be in the setting of a psychotherapist. It can be in the setting of just a support person. We've got impacted people who just need somebody to talk to, just need an ear, and I've only got 2 ears, and so we can utilize the services locally for kind of anything that people have to offer, that want to start working on issues related to police violence. Obviously, folks can reach out to me. Dr. Allen, working with Dr. Allen, who, like I said, I met him a couple of years ago, and he was trying to figure out what he could do with his, from his standpoint, with his status as a doctor. So, was there anything else specific? I literally could talk about this for 100 years. It's my life work. This is a very specific thing that I have dedicated my professional and private life to doing. So I certainly welcome anybody that wants to communicate more about it with me or wants to get involved, to please let me know.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I have so many questions for you, but I don't want to hog up like the time from students. But I did have one question just before we get into the official Q&A. And I'm sorry I can't turn my video on, but I was wondering if you could speak to the fiscal impacts that Vallejo is facing now as a result of having to settle so many cases and so many, paying out so many millions of dollars for these wrongful shooting deaths committed by VPD.
Yeah, one of the biggest impacts is that, a lot of people, and even the members of the police department, in the last couple of years, command staff members, when confronted by community members, they said, oh, well, it's the insurance that pays. But it's like anything else. The first time you have a DUI, it increases the cost of your insurance. The 4th, 5th, or 10th time you do it, at some point you become uninsurable. And so we're already in the high risk insurance pool right now. We were in a normal insurance pool with other local cities like Vacaville, Fairfield, in places in the community. They kicked us out because we were sucking up the resources from the insurance pool. They do municipal insurance pools to make it affordable for the municipalities to group together, but nobody would be insured with us because we had too much liability from, a wide range of things, from, police murders to, we had a rape and kidnapping victim that was accused of being a fraud and a liar when she had been a bona fide ripped off the street and thrown in the trunk of a car, and the police department publicly called her a scammer. A couple $1 million for her, just hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that have been paid out. So now we could get to the point in the near future where the city is uninsurable. Of course, they have to pay out to the max of what your insurance is for things that have already happened. But, going forward, I don't know that the city of Vallejo will survive another shooting cost-wise. Frankly, I don't know that they survive. I don't know that they survive. If they make us go to trial, I don't know that they survive. In 2019, I went to a public meeting with the city council people and various community leaders and said, if you don't stop murdering people, I'm going to bankrupt the city, because it's that important to me that you stop murdering people. And people were calling me, a ambulance chaser and a variety of other unpleasant things. But yeah, I don't care if the city goes bankrupt if they keep murdering people. There's a value of human life that at some point somebody has to intervene and say, I don't care what the repercussions of that, you're going to stop killing members of my community. When William McCoy got killed, I knew William McCoy. He had been to my home. He was a friend of my children's father. And so, it was very personal to me. Willie is a like third cousin to my children. And so there had to be a stop point. And so nobody was listening. I offered to meet off the record, meaning no, I can't use it against you in court, with the mayor, with the city council. So I could sit and say, I will talk to you about what is necessary to prevent the city from going bankruptcy if you want to. As a lawyer, as a person much more familiar than they were with what was going on, and everybody ignored us. And now we're coming towards that place. The city of Vallejo right now estimates that they have $50 million in outstanding liability. How in the world would we pay that? The city of Vallejo doesn't have insurance coverage to that extent, and they don't have it in their general funds. I mean, we don't have that money, and so, but that would be what they assess if we have to go to trial, for example. You get a jury that hears about badge bending and realizes that Willie shouldn't be dead and that the supervisors were watching Netflix instead of responding to the scene to help. That verdict alone could bankrupt the city easily. And honestly, when you kill a person that's sleeping when you didn't need to, maybe it should. And so we're kind of in this precarious situation where the next misstep that the city of Vallejo takes could send us all over the edge. I mean, I live in Vallejo. I have my children in public school in Vallejo, so I've got, I have a dog in the fight. It's personal to me, but at the same time, what other choice we have? So we're in what's the city sort of denies it, but we're in a very precarious situation financially because of the harm that has already been caused. I mean, what is your brother or son or father's life worth? What's that dollar amount that would be enough to teach the city a lesson that they have to stop murdering people? And when a jury gets to decide that, the jury could decide that's $100 million, or it could be $1. It just depends. And so they're in this really, really precarious situation that we're doing everything in the world that we can to try to prevent that from happening, but unfortunately they're not interested in really negotiating to what we want is reform. We're not asking them for money right now. What we're asking them to do is to agree to have the federal court supervise what's going on with the department for a couple of years. And the city is just like, no, they're not going to do it. They're just, they absolutely will not, they will not do the things that we think are necessary to prevent the loss of human life. And so we're kind of, because they've made me a specific target, we're kind of at a standstill because the final decision maker in these cases that they have in front of them is me. And I'm the person that they've been calling crazy for several years. And so we're kind of in a weird situation financially that hopefully we will resolve in a way that won't harm the city anymore. But obviously we can't come off of our position because our position is that you can't allow the police department to murder people. And to me, it's just a basic moral standpoint that we're at right now. I mean, it's the difference between right and wrong, and what's been going on is wrong. And we believe that, we'll do everything that's necessary to ensure that we don't have to meet another impacted family. Every new person that gets murdered causes tremendous pain and hardship to the other families because it means that it hasn't stopped. And, when we embrace these new families, we call it the club that nobody wants to be a part of. And the families are a good support structure for one another, but they don't want to meet anyone else. So yeah, the fiscal impact is here. It's pending. It's coming. You have, like I said, the officer that killed Sean Monterosa, that was his 5th shooting. I mean, the next time he kills somebody, the liability is just, he's still working. They did not fire him. That liability is something when he harms somebody else, it's not like they're going to be able to say we didn't know. You were forewarned that you have these dangerous people in your department and you won't terminate them. So we're kind of at that place right now at the standstill of trying to do everything we can to not bankrupt the city while knowing that the city doesn't want to do the things necessary to not kill people. So yeah, kind of a very, very difficult situation we're in right now, and very, very, probably very close to not being able to be insured.
Wow, it's like shocking. I'm astounded by the lack of moral, just the appetite to do something, to do the right thing. And I feel like it's going to have to come down to money. And I hope that's not the issue. It seems like money is always the sort of like moving, that's what's going to move people. But I will leave it at there, and I will let everyone else, anyone else who has questions for you, because I know there's probably lots of questions for you, so I won't hog up more time. I'll follow up a little bit later after other people have had a chance.
I see LaDonna's hand.
Oh yes, I see your hand too. Sorry.
Yeah, hi. I was just gonna say though, I am getting instructed by my baby that in class you don't engage that much. You got to sit and listen more. You're talking too much. I'm like, uh-oh. Okay, so but this here is my passion. And I just want to add, first of all, I want to say thank you for this wonderful presentation, and so much information. And to the students, I want to respectfully say to you all, that spirit that you have that's calling you, you can't run from it. And I'm inspired because a lot of my work was environmental justice in Vallejo. Well, actually throughout California, but focusing in Vallejo, San Francisco, Richmond. And Vallejo, whether you guys realize it or not, with the cement plant that was trying to be built on the south side of town, the blackest side of town, when you students got involved was the turning point. And the spirit in which you guys went up against y'all's administration, who we first contacted to say, hey, you guys are over here. You're going to get hit first. They pretty much snubbed us. And then the students got involved and wrote letters and supported the community. And whether you all know it or not, we were one of the first cities to stop a cement plant from coming in Vallejo that was marketed as a green, healthy, you could eat it out of a cereal bowl. I'm making the correlation because they tell us that environmental justice and police brutality does not connect. They're apples and oranges, but in fact, they are very connected. And if we can make strides and force folks to do what everybody assumed we were going to have this cement plant in, and you being in medical, you know how devastating it is. You have the same ability to affect that change in the police department, because that to me is one of the highest things causing murder here in Vallejo, is the way police have just impunity. They could just kill us, wake up and drink a cup of Starbucks and decide to kill us and won't be convicted. And especially if you're Black in this town. And it's so many connecting fibers. It's just hard to know where do you start. But at least for Black folks here, when we can't turn to and she pointed to that, you have a religious leader sitting on the side of the police department against a family whose loved one has been murdered. Then you also have NAACP playing a role in this, where we call them ambulance chasers, where they only appear when the camera is on, but don't really want to do the dirty work and protect, folks that they claim to protect. But they also have contributed to silencing the voices of murdered families, or families that are speaking out for their murdered loved ones. We have a lot of those elements playing in, but you students helped force that change. It forced then AG Becerra, who is now, I guess, in the White House, right? But you guys helped force them to pay attention to Vallejo, which they ended up, before he went out, they actually came to Vallejo. We did a short video on environmental justice, but we also pointed to the need to call in the forces on this police brutality. And so I just wanted to say thank you guys, and keep pushing and find whichever way you can engage with the community to demand that change. And don't let it die down that George Floyd, because these are just names each time something happens. But, today it's us, tomorrow it could be you. And so, yes, they put one face in front of you, but the devastation that causes it, which is racism, plain and simple, it is racist any way you look at it. Police was not designed ever to really protect the innocent, although that's what they say. It was designed to protect white privilege and white power, and folks don't want to speak on it, but that's what it is. So if we really want to get to this fair and justice for all of us, then we gotta do something different. Like they say, only a fool does the same thing and expect the same results. Like, we got to step out of the box. Unfortunately, we got to step outside of Vallejo, bring in those forces. But a lot of it does definitely rely with you students and the next generation coming up. So definitely, bug her, bug Miss Knoll, bug the community groups that are involved in this. And we look forward to working with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a couple excellent points. I mean, one, always when talking about the history of policing in America, you have to go from the understanding that policing started with slave patrols. That was their job, was to initially to catch Black people who had escaped to freedom. And then those transitioned into deputy sheriffs whose job was to protect white property and to prevent Black and indigenous people from thriving and getting near, getting near white people. And so, though, I mean, we still have the same stars for police badges that they did when they were slave patrols. And so I just, you can't disconnect history from what's currently going on. The system of oppression that created law enforcement in America, the culture of that has not changed very much over the years. Really the only difference between what's going on now with policing and what was going on 30, 40 years ago with policing is that the police forces have more diverse abusers. I mean, that's what sort of came to, is that they're like, oh, look, we have a Black, police chief, and he's not doing any better than the white police chief was. I mean, he's blue. And so we came to realize that the culture of policing internally, it is, as long as you're willing to engage in the system of oppression, they don't care what color you are as a police officer. And so there's some sort of weird sociology experiment, going on with the police departments, where you find that some of the most violent abusers in departments like we have here, one of our most violent, dangerous police officers, who was made into a lieutenant last year, is a Black man. And so, but he's not a Black man in any sense. He's a blue, and he is a police officer, and he's aligned with the views and the culture of the police department. And so people somehow, what we were giving out here with our new police chief was that we were it was to placate the community, and that there was people that said, oh, everything's going to be fine, we have a Black police chief. And I was like, oh, it's a great misunderstanding of the history of policing and how Black people have been used as pawns in those organizations to sort of create the pretense of diversity, when the reality is what they are upholding, no matter the race of the officer or the command staff member, they're upholding the system of oppression that was founded on. So like I said, it's an just incredibly important point for people to realize that's how do you change the system of something that was inherently racist from, and because Tina made a good point. Same thing with Obama. It's like, oh, we have a Black president, now everything's going to be great. And it's like, no, it's just, it's the idea now. Like, oh, we have a Black vice president. She's also the person, when she was the attorney general in California, who decided that the police should continue policing themselves. She was a top cop, and somebody that we as people who were pleading with her a couple of years ago to come and help us, and she ignored us, we consider to be sort of, part of the, part of the systemic problem. And so that, like I said, it's incredibly important to look at the history of what policing has always been. We've just been sold, particularly people, white and affluent and elite people of all races, have been sold the idea that police are heroes and that they're here to help us. And, there's a good portion of the population that knows that that's never been the case. And so people are now sort of becoming they're becoming disillusioned of what they believed. And people are going, well, why are the police getting worse? Oh, they're not. They've been doing this for a long time. We just now have video footage. We have cell phone footage. We have body cameras. The police have been abusing and murdering people for forever. It's just that the people that were telling the stories, the Black and brown and poor people, nobody listened to them until there were videos to support them. They didn't believe the words of the victims. And now we have no choice, because you can see it with your own eyes. You can't call somebody a liar when you can see the violence that they've endured. So I saw another hand. I don't know where it went. Maybe I'm imagining it.
Anyone else have any more questions? You can type them into the chat if you like.
I just wanted to add in there too. My father was actually a police officer for 25 years, and then left and came back in and became a sheriff. So I'm not anti-police at all. I was raised in law enforcement, but I am about justice and what's fair and just. And so I really appreciate that you touched on the part about Obama and Kamala, because Obama, folks don't realize, didn't he sign a Blue Shield when he was in office that pretty much gave police more protection against being charged for things that they did that weren't fair. So he added an additional protective layer for him. And Kamala's record was horrific on the local front for those of us that were victims, and we appealed to her, and there was just, deaf ears. So we have major stuff that we're up against. And so even like doing this class is a real trauma type feeling, going through it and reliving it, and even having to answer the questions. But then again, if we don't do it and we don't engage, then they get to continue to abuse and murder us without any accountability.
I think that the idea that that these problems get corrected by the race of the the elected officials. I mean, of course, we want diversity because it's necessary to advance forward, but diversity at the expense of progress is not helpful. And so we're seeing a lot of that. One of the things LaDonna also touched on, super important, of an issue that we have locally. There is sort of it's been sort of a problem of like elitism, where people of all races that are affluent, a lot of people that go to church, no, I have no grievance with people that go to church, but people that sort of fancy themselves as being above the people that get killed by the police, they've sort of turned a blind eye to the things that are going on too. Like you mentioned, when I first got involved, the families, but back in 2017 in Vallejo specifically, when Angel Ramos was killed, and then going forward, the first things people ask me is, where are the churches and where's the NAACP? And I'm like, that's a great question. And within the first few months of us being present, the police chief changed from Chief Badu, who the last very racist guy was, and the city put together a proclamation for him. And so we went down and we booed him. As soon as they started to do the proclamation, we stood up and started booing and chanting, and we refused to just allow him to just accept that he was going to be honored when he had caused such harm. He had concealed crimes that were happening under his watch. And within a few days, the president of the NAACP wrote a letter to the editor condemning us for booing him. And so it was like shocking to us. Like, we sort of viewed the NAACP in the way that it was historically as a part of the civil rights movement. We sort of, they sort of foolishly expected that the church community was going to be present in the same way that it was in the civil rights movement. And that is not the situation. A lot of the church folks out here, one particular pastor who's targeted me, I won't name him because I don't feel like that's helpful. When members of this congregation came forward and said we should write a letter on behalf of the faith community condemning the shooting of Willie McCoy, he specifically said, well, he was not a member of this church. He said if his pants were up a little bit higher, maybe he wouldn't be dead. And then he said, why was Willie out at that hour? Now, mind you, he was killed at about 10 p.m., right? It's not like he was out in the middle of the night in a dark alley. He's at a drive-through. And so there was this victim blaming that had gone on, where the position was, it was almost like the church folks were using the impacted dead individuals as cautionary tales. Well, if you don't stay on the path of the Lord and pay your tithes, you're going to end up dead like that guy. And so we didn't get any of the support from that community. I've been very vocal about my concerns with the faith community. A few of those local pastors, Ricky Nutt, for example, have stepped up and had started to engage with the community and make those connections with the impacted community. Others doubled down and called me an ambulance chaser. Some of them said that I was bad I've been called bad for the Black community because I was standing up for people that they thought, well, why are you standing up for somebody who had a drug problem or who was doing something they shouldn't have been? And to me, it's a moral issue. And so I came sort of at odds with some of the people who were moral leaders because I felt that they were not doing the things that they should have been. I mean, we're supposed to be, from a biblical perspective, you're supposed to be judged by how you treat the least among us, not the highest among us. And so there was this sort of disconnect from what I thought their obligations were, like scripturally. And I was very critical of it because, like I said, I'm not an angel, but there's a difference between right and wrong. And I feel like they weren't necessarily aligned with what was right. And some of those folks were taking money from the city that was influencing their ultimate decision not to get involved. Some folks were going to conferences with chiefs of police and rubbing elbows and making friends with people who were known patent racists. I mean, they were unequivocally racist people. And so some of those things that people don't realize are kind of going on, not just in Vallejo, we have these same issues reported across the country with the faith community. Things have just changed where people that were more faith leaders previously who had, were kind of, I think, led by their morals, what that spirit was telling them to do, have gone now into trying to figure out how they can, drive nice cars.
But do you see how hypocritical it is when they blame, and I heard that with Mr. Willie McCoy.
I think it's a cop out to some degree, because we had police violence problems way preceding that, dated back to my childhood. I mean, I first became aware of police violence problems, I would say probably junior high, when I started, went to a more diverse school and was surrounded by people of color and had I obviously didn't have those personal experiences myself as a little white kid, but once I started hearing about it, there were particular officers that at that point were known to beat up and rob people. I mean, just those were things that we were sort of raised with. The bankruptcy, it's been heavily there's been lies sort of told about how it impacted us. We're still one of the higher paid police departments in the state. And so at one point, the Vallejo police were incredibly overpaid. They were I think the second highest in the state. And so the fact that they didn't stay incredibly high for such a small town, when I was in law enforcement back in the early 2000s, 2001, Vallejo was the kind of the place to go because they paid so much more than other departments. And so we're still a very high paid department. They put it out that somehow we pay really poorly and that's why we get bad officers. And that's not what it is. We had a very corrupt police chief that came from Oakland. Chief Nicolini's son was hired, even though he had a long history of misconduct. He made it up to lieutenant before and started harassing me before he ultimately now they're trying to fire him. But his dad came in when the Oakland Police Department was getting reformed. He fled to Vallejo, brought his son in, and a lot of the dirty cops came from Oakland because Oakland was being monitored by the federal courts. And so the bad, heavy-handed racists came to Vallejo. And so it wasn't really related to the bankruptcy. I think that's just it's been an easy excuse to say, oh, it's this one thing that's responsible. And no, I don't, that hasn't been my observations haven't been. I mean, sure, the bankruptcy made it worse, but it didn't create the problem. And if we had tons of resources, we would just have more violent, heavy-handed officers, because no matter how overworked you are or even underpaid you are, being underpaid doesn't make you murder people. It doesn't make you racist. I've worked, I've delivered pizza. It didn't make me a racist, right? I mean, you can be poor. It doesn't make you racist. There are things where you have issues that if officers are having to work double shifts where they make tactical decisions or make mistakes, that would be different. We don't have those kind of situations. No amount of tired would make you shoot an unarmed guy in the back when he's crawling on the ground. That's your corruption, or your core being is awful. Some of the things we have going on had nothing at all to do with that. I've got clients who've had multiple bones broken. We have Vallejo police officers that have attacked victims, crime victims, who called to make 911 reports, and then the officers called in physically attacked the victims. I mean, that doesn't come from bankruptcy. That comes from bad rotten apples that are training and bringing up other bad apples. Badge bending doesn't come from bankruptcy. It comes from a deep-seated hatred of Black, brown, and poor people. I mean, it comes from systemic things that came up in those people's family upbringings. A lot of these officers that have came up in some of these last few cases, I've had people from at least 4 different officers, people that grew up with these officers that reached out to me on Facebook and email and things, and said, I grew up with officer such and such. He used to use the N-word. Their family's racist. They're reporting about long histories of these officers dating back to high school, where they were, participating in white supremacist actions in Napa. And so some of these things, like I said, it's easy to blame the bankruptcy. They sort of I think it was the Washington Post put out an article where they were talking about Vallejo sort of as a cautionary tale, look what happened when they defunded their police. Well, we didn't defund our police, we went bankrupt. I mean, those are 2 different things. And so there was sort of Vallejo, this is a result of a lack of finances. And it's not, it's a lack of management, it's a lack of supervision. One of the things we're mainly suing the city itself for is that we're saying they had a systemic issue of knowing that their officers were doing wrong, not disciplining them, not supervising, not retraining them, not firing them, which ratifies the conduct. If your guy does wrong and he doesn't get in trouble, he continues to do wrong. It's like having a house full of children that are unsupervised. Even if you had good children, at some point they're going to start tearing stuff up. And if they never get in trouble, they're going to keep tearing stuff up. And that's what we have out here. All of the bad officers then became decision makers in the department. They have not disciplined officers, no matter how big of a thing they did. When my client was attacked on his porch, clearly unlawful, he was videotaping the police, which is legal. He did not do anything wrong. There's not a person in the world I've ever heard say that man actually did something wrong. But the officer didn't get in trouble for running up on my client's porch, swinging his head into a pole and giving him a concussion and putting him in a police car. He got in trouble and for violating his First Amendment rights. What he got in trouble for was not writing a police report. And so even when they have gotten in trouble out here, it's not in relationship to what they've actually done. Like that officer should have been terminated and at least told that my client had a constitutional right to videotape, that what he did was excessive force, and there should have been some penalty. But they didn't care about the force and the First Amendment or this man being attacked in the sanctity of his home. They cared that he hadn't written a report to document abusing this person. Had he written a report, he would not have been disciplined at all. And so like those kind of things systemically, they just get worse. That's just a small thing. But when you have these officers have done things up to and including murder without being disciplined or even retrained on tactical things. And so that's really what the problem is from all the evidence I've ever seen, is that it's a lack of supervision and discipline of their employees, which has allowed them to get just profoundly out of control. And because nobody was watching, really, we didn't even have media coverage in Vallejo for breaking, unless it was like urgent news. They didn't even come out here to do stories. Several media agencies, when my client was attacked on his porch, had to get permission to cover Vallejo. We were in a media black hole, too far from Sacramento, too far from San Francisco. Nobody really cared. And so they were continuing to engage in this misconduct because nobody was watching. And they knew that there would be no penalty because you didn't have to worry about whether you were going to get in trouble for doing wrong, because your sergeant was a murderer too. The lieutenant was a murderer too. And so like, you don't worry about beating some guy up when the guy next to you shot somebody in the head and didn't get in trouble. And so those kind of things ratify the misconduct, and it continues to snowball until you have a situation where when Willie McCoy was out there in his car, they didn't follow any of their training and policies. And that officer, who had a history of using racial slurs in relationship to officer-involved shootings, said on video, if he moves, and the other guy goes, yep, he's basically put out use the shot collar. He said, if he moves. The officers acknowledged that they understood what was going to happen to Mr. McCoy when he moved. They premeditated killing him. And as soon as he moved, they shot at his car 55 times. And there was no training, no retraining, no debriefing, nothing to indicate that they had any interest in preventing that from happening in the future. Like if you think a person is in danger, you don't stand over them. You get back and you get behind cover. There's just basic police tactics that they didn't get in trouble for not following. They didn't get in trouble for saying, if he moves, kill him. Because it's illegal. It's patently illegal to say that once a person moves that you have the right to kill him. But that's exactly what happened, and they killed him. They've gotten off scot-free with the department and from the city. And so what is preventing any of those officers from finding another sleeping black man that they think is dangerous and shooting him when he wakes up? Nothing, because they haven't gotten in trouble. And from all appearances, it doesn't appear that they're ever going to get in trouble unless the DOJ comes in and starts investigating like the badge bending. There's a lot of murderers that have gone free and continue to get paid, a couple $100,000 a year to terrorize the community. So like I said, the bankruptcy is a cop-out. I refuse to allow that to be the reason why we're saying that people are racist and violent. The connection's not there for that. It did bring in worse officers that were fleeing other departments that were reforming, but it didn't cause the problems. Not by any stretch, I don't think.
Well, thank you so much. That is so clarifying, because it seemed to be like this in every article I read. That's all the bankruptcy of 2017. I'm like, what? I don't understand like, how that's relevant, but that's really clarifying. And it's what it sounds like, obviously this department, this police department is suffering from, just no supervision. The fact that no one's going to get charged, there are no consequences, and there aren't any calls for changing how they approach their jobs. There's no training reform or anything. So it sounds like the answer really is what we need is federal intervention. And when we got a chance to speak before today, you said, Vallejo is the perfect case study for why a police department needs oversight, independent oversight, because the police can be trusted to police themselves. And, so it sounds like we really do. And with the bending of badges, I think seems like that hopefully will, unfortunately, it sounds like, that that's the only way you can get the federal government and the new DOJ office involved. And of course, we're just waiting for the DOJ to come online, so to speak, because it's been really hollowed out in terms of like its capacity to do anything, to work to identify rogue police departments that need oversight, that need consent decrees that need that. And that's by the Trump administration. They really did, change a lot of things. They stopped, any sort of, they prevented any action to be taken. So that all has to be built back. And of course, we don't know what to expect from the Biden-Harris administration on this. I mean, I've read a little bit about their plans, but I don't see a lot. The most encouraging thing is that you have organizations like APHA, the American Public Health Association, making a lot of recommendations that, they have like 12 recommendations, which are great. And that hopefully will galvanize the public health sector to start, ramping up their research efforts and studying, and working with organizations and providing funding. Because what you so eloquently pointed out is that you can maybe get the DOJ to intervene. There'll be a court intervention to monitor the police department, which I think is really needed. And at this point, but you said, what are we going to do about those people who have been harmed? There's so many generations of people who are been harmed, and how can we support those families? And so I think, as someone from, the researcher in me, it's thinking like, okay, well, the best thing we can do is gather the evidence. We have to collect the data. We have to get all this information that has been blocked. We haven't been able to collect this data. And I'm so glad that you put in the source for Open Vallejo, because I was looking for something exactly like that. I was looking at The Guardian, and I was looking at the, mapping violence, police violence app that, we have in our resources. The students have that, but this is something that's definitely that we can use for our research efforts at Toro. But it sounds like, there's so much we can do in working with the police departments and the public health department and our university and other universities to, first of all, start looking at APHA's recommendations on our end, because what we really need to be concerned with is protecting the health of our community and preventing this from ever happening again, and putting things in place so that we can respond to their needs. And there's just like nothing, in terms when you hear that high school kids are, who've lost their parents, their uncles, their brothers are in school, and they haven't been provided the services that they need in order to survive and thrive in this hostile environment. It's just really heartbreaking. And I feel like this is where we see this intersection where we can do that as future public health and clinicians, professionals in the field. And this has been so enlightening for me to really connect the dots even more. That is the reason why we developed this concentration in health equity and criminal justice. And, the work that you are doing is really highlighting the need for it. And then also, that Dr. Caesar is working on, we're just so, this is like that, that's like one of the biggest first steps that we have made in order to look at the impacts of police violence on our community. And it's really been heartbreaking to see what has happened over the years and to read about it and do as much research. So I just want to thank you for helping me and us to connect those dots even more.
And I was going to say
And I
too,
know
if you
it's
add in,
6:31, so I don't want to keep you.
yeah, I was just going to ask one other thing is when you also add in the district attorney's office, because they have what's called the victim witness that is supposed to help you with mental health issues for the victim. And it is absolutely non-existent. And it seemed to me that Turo can really play a role in putting the pressure on them to, actually provide some additional real services around, even acknowledging the PTSD and the mental issues related to that as well. But, that department also is responsible, right? If I'm not correct, for taking it to the next level after the police department. And many of them fail because they fail to even convict or even want to research the crime that happens. I know in our case, we were told, well, when my daughter became a victim, at least she didn't die. So get on food stamps and welfare to make up for your financial loss. And then you could apply for Medi-Cal for the mental health part. Like that is the extent of any kind of medical or mental support mental health support you would get in Solano County.
Yeah, you brought up an incredibly important point. Our district attorney has, she's never prosecuted an officer-involved shooting, even things that are obviously crimes. When I first became, sort of involved in dealing with her directly, I had a meeting with her. She refused to answer my client's question about whether she takes police union donations for her campaign. Finally, I'd interrogate her. I mean, it was unfortunate that I had to ask her 8 times before she finally admitted that she did. She had a Blue Lives Matter flag as her profile picture on social media for a long time. We found out later that the person that's being, ultimately has to prosecute officer-involved shootings in this county, while our district attorney for Solano County married a Solano County Sheriff's Department lieutenant, that conflict of interest is just overt. I mean, she had a history of being in relationships with multiple bad apple police officers. She has a bias that is just, she cannot resolve the bias that she has because of the personal relationships she maintains with members of law enforcement. I mean, it would be like me being married to a police officer. It's just a tremendous conflict of interest. Nobody should have to have explained to her that as the district attorney, she shouldn't marry a command staff member of a department that she's overseeing as the district attorney. But, those kind of issues. The last officer involved shooting for Willie McCoy, because we pointed out her bias, she passed it off to another district attorney who had a long history of allowing police to murder people. So she took a retired San Bernardino person, made him a special prosecutor, and then provided him evidence that she was not allowed to provide him, including an expert report that the city of Vallejo spent a lot of money to get. They used it for PR, and it was produced to the special prosecutor as evidence. It's just something that would never be allowed to be evidence, never could be considered. But she handpicked somebody from Southern California that she knew would not prosecute the officers. And so they also, one of the issues with the victim witness program is that because the people that get killed by the police are checked off as suspects, we're not eligible for that money for their family members, even if they were witnesses, small children, because they are considered to be the suspect. And so the city and county of San Francisco, the district attorney for San Francisco has changed that. He will allow police murder victim families to get victim witness funds, but he's the only district attorney in the state who, we have a lot of my clients over the years have had, now I'm in a better position to be able to assist, but a lot of them have had to do car washes and GoFundMe's to bury their family members. They didn't have the basic, people, impoverished people being required to come up with a couple $1,000s to cremate somebody does not have it oftentimes. And so those kind of funds at times like that would be tremendously important, but those funds don't exist in this community. And so we are forced to sell, hot plates and car washes and to, while grieving for the loss of your loved one, your brother, sister, or son, you're having to wash cars so you can bury him. I mean, just most of us can't even comprehend being out there washing cars with tears running down your face for $10 because you need to bury your brother or your son. I mean, it just makes me want to cry, you know, it's those are the things that I've witnessed that make that put that made me put myself on the line, my body on the line, because it shouldn't be like that. We shouldn't have situations where the village does not take care of us in any way, that we don't have sources available for things like that. Because even if your family member was, you know, quote unquote, rightfully killed by the police, that person deserves to be buried. You know, they deserve to have those kind of basic things. But, you know, but the system is set up in a way that the families are barred from getting any sort of funds for services because they are considered to be the family of the suspect or the wrongdoer. And so, you know, those are things that need to change as well, to change. I mean, along with making sure that the district attorney can't take police union money, there's just certain things that would need to change change that. I said, it's lots of information, but some of those things, particularly when it comes to the DA, people go, well, why, if there was this wrong going on, why isn't the DA doing anything? Because she's married to a cop. I mean, you know, there's reasons for, you know, they take police union money. They have these special relationships with these special interest groups. Police unions are some of the strongest special interest groups in the country. And so they have a lot of money to give people. And for example, and just one last thing, in Fremont, there was a 16-year-old girl Fremont police had killed in 2017. She was an innocent victim, and they shot her multiple times and killed her. Within the same month, one of the shooters, who happened to be the president of their police officer association, the police officer association donated $10,000 to the district attorney's office a month after he shot and killed a 16-year-old girl. And of course, there were no charges filed. But, you know, to me, if I did that, they would call it a bribe. But when the police unions do it, it's a donation. But, you know, we've often pondered the idea that when somebody gets killed, can we donate money to make the DA do her job? Like I said, those are just factors that exist in all of the communities, not just Vallejo, where these conflicts of interest happen that have to be corrected to ever get anyone closer to justice.
That is so important. And in terms of, because this class focuses ultimately on policy and changing policy and influencing it, so that we can mitigate the impacts of, you know, the adverse effects of criminal justice policies, you know, the conflict of interest is a big thing. Having these types of special interests funding the DA's office is like crazy to me. And I, you know, if I could write some sort of policy brief on that, that'll be wonderful. But then, you know, how do we get involved, you know, in sort of like as students, as community members, you know, we can see the need that we need independent oversight from the federal government. How can we be involved? I mean, how can we also at the same time support families in Vallejo who have been impacted?
I mean, so there's a few things from like a policy standpoint. We encourage everybody to write, email, call your local elected officials. Out here, we've got Bill Dodd, who's kind of a useless person, Mike Thompson, who's equally useless, Assemblyman Grayson, not super helpful. He's been the most helpful of unuseful people, but they all are impacted by public pressure. They don't want to get, you know, most people aren't going to reach out. So those calls, even if it's 10 or 20 calls, are meaningful to them because they're like, if 10 people are calling, that means 10,000 people are concerned. And so, you know, being the squeaky wheel, contacting the Attorney General's office, as soon as they announce who the new Attorney General is, local people from Vallejo should be reaching out saying, we're terrified of our police department, please come and investigate. It can be that simple. You don't have to have all the fine details. We know about this badge bending thing, and we're terrified that our friends and loved ones are going to be murdered by these people who are looking to kill people to engage in this ritual. They have this motivation to do it. Like those basic things lets the new Attorney General coming in, puts them on notice that we as a community are concerned. Can't stress how much the personal contact with those offices and those people are in making the thing. We got it wasn't helpful because the district attorney was the person who got to select the special prosecutor, but we forced her to not make the decision about Willie McCoy herself by expressing our concerns about her bias. And so reaching out to people, we're asking our current district attorney to resign because of her bias. I mean, people can draft letters to tell her your personal relationships with members of law enforcement and taking police union money makes it so we can't trust you. We'd like to see you resign. I mean, she has already been impacted by the public pressure. She's made a bunch of statements in defense of herself. And so contacting all of those people directly is a major way. There's local advocacy going on. The impacted families have their own group of people that are advocating. I mean, just coming up Tuesday, we will be in Sacramento in front of the Capitol at noon in a participating in a rally. Everybody's invited. We're demanding state oversight. We've got folks coming in from all over the country. Tamir Rice's family, Michael Brown's family. We have, folks all over that understand that the fight in California, what's going on in California to some degree dictates what happens in the rest of the country. And so once we become more progressive with our policing policies, the rest of the country sort of follows suit. So what's going on in New York and California sort of direct what's happening everywhere. And so they're coming out here to support us. So physically, just bringing your physical body to something like that. We put together rallies and protests and get as many people as we can. Sometimes we get a decent showing and sometimes we don't, but whether it's 10 people or 10,000, we'll be there with that family because that's the 2-year anniversary of Willie's murder and he needs justice. We need investigation of the police department in Vallejo specifically and statewide oversight. And so having, actually directly participating, that's kind of the best way. Like I said, if everybody showed up, like I said, filling out the crowd. You don't have to participate in a sense of talking. You don't have to know anything about what's going on, but just physically being there as an ally, showing support. I tell people all the time, I don't expect people to do what I do. I don't expect people to put themselves in positions of getting death threats. I'm not an ally. I'm more of a, accomplice, I guess, of how it's referred, because I'll put my body on. I don't expect everybody to put your body on the line. I'm always prepared that the police may come to my house and do something to me. I've been under surveillance from Vallejo PD. We don't expect people to do all of that, but showing up is big. That's the part that scares them. It's not the people that are impacted showing up. It's the people that are not impacted caring that makes a difference. When you have the people that aren't part of the traditional groups that are impacted by police violence showing up and saying, we are not okay with Black, brown, and poor mentally ill people being killed by the police, it makes a profound difference because you folks are the folks they want the votes from. They're not worried about my clients. They don't even consider them to be voters. Some of them aren't even allowed to vote, but it's the taxpayers, the average everyday person, people that are gainfully employed, never get in trouble showing up, that makes a difference between whether we get those laws changed or not. We can make a lot of noise, but we need the support of other people. And I was shocked myself. I had no idea the impact that I could make with just my voice. It never occurred to me that my one voice could potentially change the trajectory of what's going on. But once I got out and started shouting, we've seen changes that have occurred, people getting terminated, things that we never expected to be able to see happening just because we kept showing up and we kept shouting, and the group got a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger. And now the city sort of acknowledges that we exist and that they were denying the police violence problem in 2019. Now they're acknowledging it and saying we're trying to work through it. They're still trying to brush it under the rug, but they're no longer denying its existence. And so that physical, you putting your body present, it means a tremendous amount to the impacted families. They're going to be their rain of shine. You guys have a choice. I don't have a choice. I've got to be there to make sure my clients are safe and people I care about, are safe. But the other people going out of your comfort zone to participate and get around people. I've been incredibly impressed by seeing the number of people that have gone to rallies surrounded by people that weren't from their demographic, and they worked through that discomfort. And it's okay to acknowledge that discomfort exists, because these aren't necessarily the people that you would hang out with in real life, but these are the people who, if we're doing right and being decent, these are the people we're supposed to be standing up for. These are the people that need us the most. And so showing up for them at your own expense, on your own time, on your own dime, means the world to them, because they want to see faces that aren't just my face and the face of other people that are being killed. They want to see people and go, hey, you know what? I doubt that person will ever be killed by the police. And that's why I'm glad that they're here. It's not the realities are that the impacted community, the Black, brown, and poor people, don't make up the majority. And so we'll never have enough numbers without allies and people coming to come in defense of the people that are being harmed. It's necessary. It's only, I said, I recognize my privilege of being able to stand up and do that now with less and less fear of retribution as time goes by. But there's a lot of people who can't even speak up in defense of themselves because they're so terrified. So having numbers, just physical bodies there, it makes all of the difference in the world. And it's not a one-time thing. We do these things at the district attorney's office. We do rallies. We did it in COVID. I mean, we've done it. We do it social distancing, because we can't wait until the pandemic is over, because we're dealing with a pandemic of police violence too. And so for a lot of us, we prioritize. I've had COVID twice, but because I've been in places around people, because I don't have any choice, because it needs to be done. And so there's, we don't tell people to endanger themselves, put on your mask, but show up, mask up and show up is kind of our new motto for COVID season, is like, don't make the excuse that there's a pandemic, because there's been a pandemic, directed at Black and brown and poor people forever, and it's about time we show up for those folks too. So yeah, definitely getting directly involved. Anyone can reach out to me. I'm Melissa, MELISSA @noldlaw.com. You can reach out to me directly if you want to get directly involved in what's going on with advocacy. We've always got the necessity. We're going to initiate a campaign after next week when we go to the Attorney General's office to rally. We'll be initiating a campaign where we're going to be putting together packets of evidence and information to go to each and every state legislator in the state of California. And so we need hands. We need people to come in and that are prepared to do the work. I'll do it all myself if I need to. We'll do it all ourselves, but it'd be nice to have, new fresh faces and people, because as I said, every new person that comes in, provides that support for people, and it means a lot to the people that have been harmed. Doesn't mean, it's not for me. It's for the people that don't have voices. I have a family member that showed up to every single thing. Her son was killed by the police out here. She's never once spoke publicly. She just can't do it. But she's always overwhelmed with emotion of the presence of people that have showed up that she didn't know, of getting condolences. And I'm sorry for your loss, to a person that's lost a loved one that's never gotten it from the community at large, is meaningful. And in ways that I can never understand what that's like. I have 5 children. I've never lost one to police violence, and God willing, I never will. And so we can't understand, but we can still support. You don't need to know what to say to somebody to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what you've gone through. I mean, I spent years of being uncomfortable, of dealing with people's grieving and not knowing what to say. But I always tell people, it doesn't matter if you don't know what to say something. It doesn't matter if you don't know how to show up, just show up. You'll figure it out from there. I'd rather have you there doing the wrong thing than at home not doing anything. And as the more you go forward and are open to learning from the impacted community, people will let you know how you can support them. But the start is just physically being there. Like I said, it just strength in numbers, and we need the numbers.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa. You are putting your health on the line, and fighting in the struggle for so many years of your life. And you, like you said, you're in this for life, and I just respect what you were doing so much. And being here this evening with us, you've given me a lot to think about in terms of how Toro and my colleagues in this track, and this is all we talk about, but I really kind of want to get more active, and how we want to sit down and discuss how we can get involved with your advocacy efforts, and especially on the when communicating with legislators, if we can do it as a university, if we can get other the county of health, the Department of Health involved in putting together something that is really tangible and meaningful at the same time, that is addressing police violence in our community. So I'm going to be very excited to talk to them about that.
Yeah, and right now, what the family of Willie McCoy has, they've become advocates. That one of his brothers has become kind of a full-time advocate, and probably one of the most knowledgeable people about what's going on in Vallejo, just from his own research and time and trying to get justice for his brother. But he started a nonprofit, the Willie McCoy Foundation, where essentially trying to do legacy work in Willie's memory, and doing things that are going to help deal with police violence problem, but also help to strengthen the community in areas where we have weaknesses that lead to, situations that result in police violence. And so we're, kind of hoping that the people, kind of working through what they're already doing, and trying to support what they're doing as an impacted family that's, putting forth like doing nonprofit work. We're trying to sort of encourage folks to reach out to them, directly to the William McCoy Foundation, because they can help facilitate getting people involved too. I mean, and for people that can't get involved and just, want to get involved or get guilted into getting involved, they can just make donations to the foundation. It's not my foundation. I don't benefit from it personally in any way. I'm not a financial beneficiary of the organization. I don't get paid anytime. Just for the record, anytime I come and participate in something that results in money coming towards me, it's always a donation to the William McCoy Foundation or to the impacted community, because this isn't a financial endeavor to me. If I do my job right, I will not be able to make money as a civil rights attorney. That is success to me, is that I ran out of business, that I have to start dealing with other areas of injustice that is not directly related to people being murdered. And so there are foundations that are sort of in place to help facilitate. They have an advocacy arm. It's just kind of getting started right now. So people that are interested, like wanting to deal with hands-on the advocacy arm of the foundation, that's up and running right now. And so we need people that are going to help with those endeavors, too, and so that definitely keep them in mind, because like I said, there's a lot of sort of, bits and pieces of community groups that are not actual nonprofits. And so it creates a situation where something that's not a nonprofit can't actually benefit from funding, because nobody wants to donate to money that's not tax deductible in large quantities, in any usable quantities. And so we thought it was important to actually have a nonprofit, so that if we're in a position to be able to get grant funds or have organizations or people that want to make donations, that they can do that, and that it's tax deductible, and that people feel comfortable knowing that everything is being done the right way. So we're, kind of getting that. The family got that started. I've kind of sort of assisted them in trying to make sure that they're doing it the right way, so that they, have their own group, their own nonprofit that's working on these issues that, that they have control over, that aren't being controlled by outsiders.
Well, thank you. That is really good to know, because it could be a foundation that we work with to place our students in their field study, work. So that is something that's really great to know, and we'd like to see how we can partner in the future.
Yeah,
thank you so.
There's like people do, like sometimes people end up doing like internships and things like that with. We did that when I was working at John Burse's office, where we, and now I'm in private practice, but where people are coming in sort of as interns to deal with the client trauma issues, to intake people with their traumas, people that are, that you don't necessarily need training, but people that have a heart to deal with the emotional well-being, that are actually doing intake of traumatic incidents, where they're basically sitting and listening to what has happened to people, and helping to facilitate sort of getting people into the route of getting whatever resources are available through the community and things like that. So there's kind of like an arm of that in what we do in civil rights work, where people are helping, not necessarily things that are going to result in legal cases, but things that where a person has to ingest this trauma that a person has gone through, and help to get them directed towards the resources that are available through the county or the state, or or private organizations. And so those are things that are potentially options for people that are interested in doing hands-on work in relation to civil rights, police related civil rights stuff. So I said, unfortunately, there's far more potential clients and people that have been harmed than any of the attorneys could actually ever handle. I'm so overrun with cases right now. It's shameful to not have more hands doing what I'm doing right now.
Oh gosh. Well, I hope that I'm really excited to find out how we can be a part of the process, in terms of working with a nonprofit would be really great. So, and we have your email address. I'm going to save the chat, and I know there might be some follow-up questions for you. So I'll make it available to the students in the community in their Canvas websites, because I'm sure there might be some other questions. that you have, that they have for you. But I know I asked you a lot of questions that I had. And so I want to welcome you to stay on. I know that you probably can't, because it's almost 7, but we have a student presentation leading a discussion on ACEs and racism as a public health issue. And that's going to be presented by Michelle Park. So I have made her the co-host. We can go ahead and share that screen.
I wish I could. I've got to go pick up my babies, but I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, I appreciate the invitation, and I encourage anybody to reach out that wants to get further involved. I'm always available. My office is on Georgia Street. I'm not hard to find at all. Surprisingly easy to find when people that are interested in doing the work. So thank you so much, and good luck with your presentation, Michelle.